On this third anniversary of Sandy to reflect on where we've been, how far we've come, and what is still left to accomplish. And to praise the people of New Jersey who have remained New Jersey proud and New Jersey strong during this long 3-year recovery process. But most importantly, it's to remind everyone in this chamber and all around the nation that the job isn't done yet. Many people believe this is over, that everyone just moved on, but I know that for many Sandy victims that this is not the case. In these last 3 years, we have made a lot of progress. Billions of dollars of federal funds have flowed to the state, were used to rebuild bridges, roads, boardwalks, help businesses reopen, and keep people working. Those fortunate enough to navigate the maze of federal and state programs have rebuilt their homes stronger and more resilient than before. And the Jersey Shore has enjoyed a resurgence in tourism, which fuels the local and state economy, creating jobs and supplementing the recovery. But while the beaches have been replenished and the boardwalks have been rebuilt, 3 years later, far too many working-class New Jerseyans, the recovery for them is not only is it incomplete, in some cases, it has still barely begun. There are still parts of the state that remain neglected. There are still families that haven't stepped foot in their home for 3 years. Now, they may not have a reality TV crew following them around, but they are the real New Jersey, the salt of the earth who form the backbone of our great state. They are the unsung, hardworking New Jersey families who suffered loss and pulled themselves back up and kept going 1 foot in front of the other every day, not only because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. For these families, even after the storm passed, the clouds parted and the sun came out, a different kind of disaster, this time man-made, was looming on the horizon. They went from filling up sandbags to fend off the Atlantic Ocean to filling out endless forms to fend off insurance companies and government officials. They had endured the fight against Mother Nature, but were simply no match against Uncle Sam. A constituent of mine and who served as a Marine, and once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine, so I won't say former Marine, but who served as a Marine, Doug Quinn, and served his country with this distinction, encapsulated this sentiment perfectly in a letter that he wrote to me. In it, he said, quote, "I was in my home the night the floodwaters rushed in. I waded out through waist-deep water at midnight to escape while electrical transformers exploded and houses burned down. That was the easy part," he said. "It's the 1.5 years since then that has been the tragedy." Let me repeat that. He says the flood was the easy part, and there's a picture of him in that flood and the consequences to his home afterwards. Now, Doug had maximum coverage of $250,000 and received estimates of damages in excess of that, $254,000. But he received only $90,000, just over a third of what he needed to rebuild. And Doug was not alone. Chuck Appleby is another one of the thousands of New Jerseyans who's had to engage in this fight for the past 3 years to get just what he deserves. Like many others, Chuck, who joined us recently, was lowballed by FEMA and his insurance company, which somehow claimed it wasn't Sandy that severely cracked the foundation of his home. According to them, it was all a pre-existing condition that just happened to magically appear the day after Sandy hit. Imagine that. You played by the rules. You faithfully paid for flood insurance for 10, 20, or 30 years. Never had a claim until Sandy came, only to find out it wasn't enough. You assumed, since you have insurance, that you would be made whole and the resources necessary to rebuild would be there. But after surviving the wind and the rain and the storm surge, you woke up to another nightmare, a flood insurance claim process that threatened to take what the storm had not. And as much as I wish it were an aberration, Chuck's story is not unique. Thousands of New Jerseyans were lowballed by their insurance company, stunting the recovery and leaving families out of their homes. Now, fortunately, I, along with Senators Booker, Schumer, and Gillibrand, were able to convince FEMA to allow all Sandy survivors to have their claims reviewed, which will result in tens of millions of dollars going to the recovery. Chuck is one of those people who opted into the process, and FEMA recently admitted its mistake and acknowledged he was shorted at least $50,000. Dawn and Sonny Markowski are another example. They stood next to me in Belmar, and this week, after having received a check to $56,000 from FEMA's claim review money that they should have received the first time around. Now, Sonny served our country as a retired Army reservist and a police chief. He is now only receiving the justice he deserved and the chance to rebuild. And even Dawn's mom, who was lowballed $17,000 on her house, got an additional $17,000 from the claims review, money she had been owed all along, and it goes on and on. It shouldn't have taken this long, nor should the path have been this winding and difficult, but these successes illustrate the incredible resiliency of all the Sandy survivors who wouldn't give up no matter how dark things appeared on the morning of October 30th, 2012. And throughout the 3 years that followed. And I will continue to fight to help everyone recover. I'll continue to be a voice for everyone in the Sandy community as we seek to repair what happened and make our communities more resilient in the future and more capable of dealing with storms like Sandy that left incredible devastation in its wake. Now, as we take a moment to think back on that day 3 years ago today, when the clouds finally parted and the ominous seas receded, the destruction Sandy left was almost unimaginable. We remember images like these of Seaside Heights. In fact, I actually took this photo while touring with the damage with Vice President Biden. And then this photo of Hoboken, New Jersey, in northern New Jersey, where street after street looked like a series of canals. Thousands of families lost everything and suddenly found themselves homeless. Billions upon billions of dollars of property, roads, bridges, trains, schools, fire stations, hospitals were in ruins. And most tragically of all, dozens of people lost their lives. It was a dark time for our entire state, no doubt about it. But as the proverb goes, the darkest hour is just before the dawn. Today, as we remember that dark hour, we recommit ourselves to completing the job and entering the dawn of a new era in the long journey to rebuild and recover. Not just to where we were before the storm, but to a place where we are stronger, more resilient, and more prepared. And I have no doubt we'll get there together, not just through our efforts here in Washington, but because of the indefatigable, dogged character of the people of New Jersey. We showed that character in the immediate aftermath when, despite the level of devastation, New Jerseyans were true to their reputation of being strong. Communities united, families, neighbors who lost their homes, and we all came together, worked together, and it was a testament to the fundamental nature of community action, community involvement, and to what real community service is all about. After seeing the impact and damage that day, I came back to Washington with a heavy heart but a determined mind, solely focused on representing the countless victims of our state who had their lives turned upside down. They didn't ask for a handout, they didn't ask for help, and kept moving forward. I remember working closely with my late colleague and dear friend, Senator Frank Lautenberg, and we made it our #1 priority to bring every available resource back to the victims of our state. And I continue to work with Senator Booker, who jumped headfirst into the fight from the moment he entered the Senate to do the same. And to be clear, we had to fight from the beginning. We had to fight a Tea Party-inspired opposition that was blocking the relief we so desperately needed. We had senators and congressmen who said no to disaster victims in New Jersey with one phrase while asking for federal funds when a disaster struck their state on the other side. But ultimately, we overcame the callous and ideological attacks and secured more than $50 billion for the entire region. These federal funds have been absolutely critical to our recovery, but mistakes by government agencies at the federal and state level have hindered our progress. But on this third anniversary of Sandy, I don't come to the floor to point fingers at FEMA or the state or to play a blame game. It's not about politics or scapegoating. It's about continuing to do all we can to deliver for the people in every disaster who still need help, and that requires cooperation and teamwork from all levels of government. One example of bipartisanship was our effort to stop the draconian flood insurance rate increases that Sandy survivors were facing after the storm. These families were being confronted with skyrocketing premiums which threatened to take what the storm had not. In response, I led a broad bipartisan coalition from all parts of the country, and we passed legislation to stop these egregious hikes and restore fairness in the flood insurance program. A recovery requires more efforts just like this. It requires the state to be transparent and open to correcting any inefficiency that causes delays, and for the federal government and every federal agency to continue to step up, step in, and make corrections where needed. It requires strong oversight and technical assistance from federal agencies like Housing and Urban Development. And as we've seen in the past, this cooperation can result in significant improvement. For example, when I discovered that homeowners were being needlessly delayed from rebuilding because the state chose to conduct historical and environmental reviews at the end of the application process, and therefore further delaying it, I worked with then Secretary Donovan to clarify to the state that they could conduct these reviews at the front end of the application process, allowing victims to begin rebuilding sooner without jeopardizing their funding. It was a perfect example of eliminating unnecessary obstacles and inefficiencies, and I was proud to lead the charge. We always need to find more opportunities like this. We need HUD to continue to work with the state to discover these inefficiencies and get people fully restored. And it's our responsibility to make the system and the process work for them. When I look at two of these families, a Marine who served with distinction in his country, a former Army Reservist police chief, their country didn't ultimately respond to them in the way that they should have. They made life more difficult, when in fact it should have been the other way around. We cannot allow partisan and geographical politics into our nation's disaster response priorities. There is a reason that we call our nation the United States of America. And I have cast my vote time and time again for flooding in the Mississippi, wildfires out west, Hurricane Katrina, and the list is on, because I believe in this, we are one country. No matter where a disaster occurs, no matter if it was across the street or across the country, we come together as a nation ready to help. With that, Mr. President, I look forward to our continuing efforts to get every New Jerseyan back into their home, and I yield the floor.